to exit the room. But if you're staying, if you could please take a seat. Doesn't have to be where you were seated before, but if you could take a seat. I'm going to call the room to order. So again, if you're not planning on staying for the Q&A, if you could continue your conversations outside the room, and please exit right now. So again, so we don't have any distractions in the room. And if you're staying, if you could please take a seat at your nearest table. And facilitators, if you need to leave, actually facilitators, if you want to leave, and just exit out the room briefly, follow kind of Hala out the back exit. And you're also feel free to stay if you want to. All right, so the way we're going to work, we're going to do this hopefully for no more than 15 minutes, again, because I don't want to be between you and lunch. But I'm going to be going around with the microphone. I'm going to ask, when you have questions, to make them as concise as possible, and we're going to do our best job to answer these expeditiously so we can get in as many questions as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move around the room going in this direction so we can hit people kind of, so I'm not running across the room back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I'm going to start over at this table. If you could just say your name and kind of where you live, that would be helpful, and then your question.
My name is Michael Solomon. I go to Springbrook High School, right across the street. So my question is on the topic of the proximity analysis. I just wanted to know, when you're looking at base schools and what to include, what not to include, how are the Northeast Consortium and the Down County Consortium factoring into that? Because I know I technically don't have a base school per se. I have 3 schools that I have the option to go to. There is no Paint Branch attendance boundary or Springbrook attendance boundary. So how are you looking at that, and how are you making that distinction?
And a shout out for all the students who came.
Question. I think the simplest way to answer is that when we look at consortiums, we consider all those schools as the base school. So if you're going to either one of those will be counted as the base school.
All right, next question. And name and then where you live.
Sure. I'm Yan Fei Yang, and I have a kid in the kindergarten in Potomac area. So I have actually several concerns. Bear with me because I'm not English. English is not my first language, so I'll try. Okay.
But we're asking people to single question.
Okay. The most important question is, I think this analyze for the second and the third part, I don't think it's validated for me. I have a science background and I analyze data. So the first about the diversity, ever from, I don't think that's the most important factor for diversity. It cannot be equal to diversity. You have to consider a lot of factors, like we are an immigration country here. So you have to consider where the people come from, their religion, and then their culture, their income, and then what they thought. That's diversity. That's where we benefit from the diversity we benefit from, not from the ever from. And then secondly, the proximity study, I think it's only count on one factor. That's a very poor analysis. Because traveling, busing is not just about the map road. It's about the traffic pattern, the timing, when you're going to pick up your class in the morning, the night, it's very different, which direction. All of this factor is not counted here. So for all the analysis, I have to say you really need to improve. Final question, you didn't include the mental impact of the kids who will be moved. I have a letter from a psychiatrist. If anyone is interested, I have a copy here.
Again, ground rule is single question. If you continue to have specific comments you want to share with us and didn't have a chance to say it at the table, ask you to write it down and we will collect it. But Adam or Kashan, I don't know if you want to have a quick response
to
to
that question. And
those
I think
two
what we
factors.
clarified up front in the analysis was that these are not the only things that we would be looking at. So I hope that all those inputs you have put down on a piece of paper will be very useful for us. But you're absolutely right, when you look at diversity, ever farms is not the only thing that matters. Similarly, for proximity, there are certain challenges when we start to look at travel times, for example, because a lot of that has to do with sort of traffic patterns, which, as you can see, kind of evolves. And we're already kind of seeing that with the whole Amazon HQ2 coming in, right? You're seeing the traffic patterns evolve. So there is that sort of part of the question that factors into the analysis, right? But like proximity in a lot of ways will have more than just what you saw today. So appreciate your question.
My name is Simon Debasai and I attend Springbrook High School as well. One question that I had was, what metric are you going to use to weigh the relationship between diversity and proximity? Because a general theme from the conversation in our group was that some parents from areas that were more dense and had schools that were much closer together were more willing to sacrifice maybe 0.2 miles for a more diverse school, but some parents who live in, say, Poolsville, or I'm not really sure with how Potomac is structured, but schools that are few and far between might be less willing, and that's understandable given the fact that distance changes depending on how our county is set up. So.
It's a great question, and I think we tried to emphasize throughout our work that everything needs to be analyzed in a kind of localized way. And I don't want to say just at a cluster level, because we'll be looking at adjacencies along cluster lines. So I think that's a very fair point, and travel is obviously different in denser areas too, where there may be more traffic. So all of these things really need to be relative to geography.
And sorry, just to add to that, you can see in the map, when you start to look at sort of some of the elementary schools, you can actually see that there is sort of a fair group of clusters, to your point, and that's also something that we want to factor in. We want to sort of start to understand these geographies not as what you see on the screen, not just as blobs, but whether they are rural, whether they are urban, what does the density look like. So all those factors will sort of be part of our analysis.
My name is Manuela Noche. I live in the Potomac area. My family and I recently moved from Silver Spring to the Potomac area in the pursuit of better reading school for our kids. So my concern, I was concerned about the travel question, but you guys addressed it. The rush hour and traffic need to be considered when we move the kids, and no highway police for our kids. And my question was about under-enrolled school. I know we're trying to fix the overcrowding in certain schools, which it makes sense. But are you planning on moving also kids from under-enrolled school, let's say, to other school for the sake of maybe diversity or ever farm? That's my concern.
And I think once again, we're not making options or recommendations. And so really what we're going to do is go through the sequence of each of those lenses, utilization, diversity, and proximity, and look at how they affect each other. Look at the interrelationship between them. So in some cases, we will look at, how does sort of solving for or considering utilization affect those other two factors, those other two lenses. But we're not making recommendations. We will look at them in conjunction with each other. So it's not a totally clear answer, but in that sense, there's no recommendations that are coming out of this that will point one direction or another.
Hi, I'm Amber Lasnevich and I live in Kensington. I was wondering if you all are considering, it was a deep data dive, about the student to teacher faculty ratio, as well as the population. So if we have ESOL, how many ESOL teachers and how many SPED teachers and how many school nurses are in the current schools.
So thank you for that question. I think that's a great question. We do want to have those data points as an overlay to whenever we talk about schools utilization, schools diversity. We do want to talk about utilization not just as a capacity, the physical capacity, right, but also teacher capacity, because that matters in how sort of kids get addressed in school. So yes, definitely.
And I think that falls in the category of we can start to look at it. It wouldn't be one of our three critical lenses, but overlaying that information could be useful.
I actually have Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Catherine, and I live in Silver Spring. My child goes to Sligo Middle School. I have a related question, which is in the interactive tool, could you include information about each school's budget allocation? So we can see if there's any discrepancy there. Also, special programs within the schools, because that's a question that came up at our table. And I second what you said. And also, like, there's also disparity within schools, inside schools. So like, percentage of AP classes, racial breakdown, farms breakdown within like those kinds of programs.
Thank you. And I'm hoping that these are really valuable feedback, guys. So I'm hoping that you're writing them down because this is exactly what we're going to get to. I'm writing them down. One other thing, and to the point about sort of whether we can overlay budget, I think that is an MCPS question for us, whether we can or cannot do, but it does seem like a good idea, but I defer to MCPS on that.
Yeah, and I think further to that question about what happens inside schools, my sense is that's not going to be within the scope of our study. Obviously, your points are important to note.
Thank you for being here. My name is Tracy Potts. I'm a Paint Branch parent and a PTA leader in this area. And my question is, we had 30, I think the data that you showed in our book showed 31% of MCPS students are Latino, and there were 5% Latino families here at this particular meeting. I was very happy to hear you say earlier that there are other means of outreach that you're doing. I wonder if you could give more detail on how you're reaching out to other people who are not, for whatever reason, coming to these meetings. And then I just want to briefly to add to that there's so many issues here that I think are very relevant and very good questions, but they are not questions that this organization is going to be making decisions on. So I hope to see this level of engagement at our Board of Education meetings, because those are the people we elected to make those choices.
So our team in January will be doing, I think, about 10 meetings to what are often called hard-to-reach populations, immigrant populations, communities of color, low-income populations, to make sure that who frequently just either can't or won't come to public meetings. So we're going to be doing that in January, and then we'll be doing it again in the second phase to make sure that we're getting good coverage there. And then we're going to be doing a series of interviews across phase 1 and phase 2 in smaller group setting, where we can also capture those kinds of perspectives and viewpoints. I'm going to go here next.
Sure. My name is Tyler Beck. I live in Aspen Hill and have a kindergartner in Wheaton Woods. I know that you all are very much not making recommendations on changing the boundaries. I understand that, but and I know that this is probably not a question that you can actually answer, but I want it to be something that's thought about. We want to know who will be making those recommendations, because the analysis is being done with the assumption that there will be eventually recommendations for changes. I want to know who will be making those recommendations, whether that's another outside firm or if it's just the MCPS leadership.
Let Derek answer.
So we have Derek Turner from the school system here who will address that question.
So the Board of Education makes the decision and recommendations around the boundary. We have a team of capital planning that puts together the data, and that data is recommended to the superintendent. The superintendent makes a recommendation to the board, and then the board makes a final decision.
Where are they?
So I'm going to continue moving around the room. I know there's tables in the front that I haven't gotten to. I'm making my way, just trying to be fair in terms of how I distribute the questions here.
Hi, Michelle Perez. I live in Wheaton. I have a first grader in Arcola Elementary. I thought this was a great meeting. I was one of the ones who admitted I didn't fully understand the data that was being presented, and I saw there's a lot of white space on all of your slides, so the opportunity to present us with 3 to 5 bullets of findings of what all of these analyses so far are telling us would be greatly appreciated for someone like me. I'm coming up with interpretations myself, and I would like to know whether those are accurate interpretations of what I'm seeing in these multicolored maps. So I don't know if you have the opportunity to change what you're doing in the next remaining meetings, or is that planned? Was this purposeful, and why was this purposeful? And when will you be presenting more detailed interpretations of the findings?
Thank you. So I guess one of the challenges from a process perspective, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with a county of 1.1 million people, how do you get everybody at the same level, right? That's a big challenge. And part of this presentation kind of addresses that. We want to make sure that people are at the same playing field, level field. Because what will happen in phase 2, and I'm sure you'd appreciate that, is that using the tool, you'll be able to actually dig into the data for yourself, and then you'll be able to sort of start to see these different relationships that we talked about. But to your point, I think we'll try and make sure that in the next revision, or the next sort of January 7th presentation, and I hope you all can attend, we'll make sure that we'll get sort of those key bullet points up here. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Yi, and my parents, I live in between Rockville and Rockville. So my question is, it's great to learn about the 3 lenses that you guys are going to conduct a study on. But I was wondering who come up with the 3 lenses, and have you validated with anyone from the BOE or any other resources? Because I know this study isn't leading to a recommendation, but the data collected in this study will be used for for their purposes. So we wanted to make sure that all the channels are being considered, all the factors are being phased in. And now just using these 3 lenses in my mind is not really a true representative of how how the county is. So I wonder, are there more processes in validating these 3 lenses, with whom, and in what format?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I'll try and answer part of it, and then I don't know, Derek, if you want to step up, sort of to jump in at some point. But the idea is that these lenses come from policy FAA, which is put out by the board and has been revised over time, as my understanding is. But I'll let Derek speak to it, but these lenses come from a policy put out by the board.
Is that right?
Okay, next question back here.
Hi, I'm Yanning. I have a middle schooler and a high school student in my family. Actually, I have a question about the standard of the Ever Farm. So who gets an Ever Farm? Because as we know, there's a published paper said a mom who's stay-home mom worth $120,000. So a mom who's working full-time don't have time to prepare like a lunch for their kids, so their kids eating more like processing food. So I think every kid who have mom is working deserve a free lunch, right? So I think right now this Ever Farm rate is the only, cannot say only, but it's the most important factors to affect this boundary study. So I think we have to think about it. So what decided who gets the Ever Farm, right? So I suggest every student whose mom is working deserve a free lunch. The other things is this standard or income standard is based on who pays the tax. I will say we have to study carefully. Some cash taking people, they get the Ever Farm, but doesn't mean they don't have the income, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We wasn't clear if there was a question there, but I think from the process perspective, I do appreciate that, and I think that's sort of an MCPS sort of, we want to talk to MCPS about that.
Okay. I'm going to take one here, and then I'm going to continue moving around the room. I see the hands.
Hi, my name is Lin. I have 2 kids in the public schools. So I want to hear and see your organization and Board of Education present the data about your plan to improve local poor performing schools, such as providing more ESL programs, providing more task prep programs, and increase teacher to student ratios, and improving their local school leaderships, and the way to get more parents involved in their children's education. So I think success for all students is a better goal than just reducing the achievement gap for the Board of Education. So I really want to see you guys come up with a more detailed plan what budget and how you're going to do to improve local poor performing schools, rather than just shuffling students around.
Okay, Boomer.
Really quick question, I promise.
I just want to follow up quickly on that. I mean, that a lot of what you discussed is really not within the scope of our work. Clearly, important things to be considering in terms of the educational programs. That's, you know, we're not looking at that.
So the boundary analysis is one part of many efforts we're doing looking at our schools. And I suggest if you're interested in how we're improving schools, that work goes on every day. But if you tune in to your computer or to the MCPS TV channel on Wednesday, December 18th at 6:30 p.m., there's going to be a live presentation about what we're doing to improve schools and our upcoming budget. So it's going to be directly from the superintendent. It's going to be live, and he'll answer questions live online. So I encourage you to tune in then.
Yeah, so first I want to show some empathy for you, because a lot of our questions are actually for, not for you. But I do have one question. Maybe Steve, you can answer this question. So you just showed, you just completed a project in NYC, Brooklyn, District 15. So I saw from a very recent news, from the New York Daily News in November of 2019. So it says, after this, you know, your project, so in 2019, the enrollment for 6th grade, dropped for 7%. And that's the first drop in the past 5 years. So it shows, either people are leaving or fewer people are coming. So can you comment on this? Thank you.
I'm going to ask Adam to address that.
So just to be clear, Steve works for Public Engagement Associates, and so he did not work on that. But in terms of the work in Brooklyn, I don't have the data in front of me, but essentially classes of 5th graders moving into 6th graders vary in size over time. And so, one of the data aspects that people looked at, for instance, was, did the white population of students change over time? It did not. It remained at 31% from last year to this year. So really, there are other critical factors like, is the overall 5th grade student population the same as it moves to 6th grade? So, but I don't have the data with me.
I think the other thing to point out is that project had a different purpose, intent, and output than this one does.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to continue because I promised a couple people with head nods that I'd come over here.
Hi. I'm wondering, I live in this school district in Potomac, and I'm wondering whether, because students is the most important audience in this analysis, I wonder how do you engage them? And because I don't even know a lot of students are aware of this, and in different schools, so I think we have some student leaders great here, and I want to see whether that message has cascaded to a lot of different schools, different students, and then why don't you do a district-wide survey for the students to ask them how far are they willing to move out of their schools, and just do a survey. It's a quick survey, and then you can get a lot of data from that.
Would you like to take that question?
So,
in terms of how we are engaging.
Kim, do you have more information on the student piece?
But the part is that we want to engage students, and there will be a meeting separately for the students where those voices will be heard and be part of that analysis. Whether that meeting is January 7th or January 14th, I think that's the part that we are still working towards, but it will happen. So.
Hello, my name is Laura Stewart. I'm a parent at Einstein High School, and also I am Vice President of Advocacy for MCPTA for full transparency. I wanted to know why, because I went to the first meeting and the map of, it was walkability and now it's proximity. I just want to know why you decided to change, and because I think walkability is also, I see value in both. And I was hoping that out of this study, we could also work on our transportation system, our walkability, to make life easier for kids. So I'd like to hear your input on that. And also, I hear a lot about programming here. There's a bill in Annapolis that's called the Blueprint for Maryland. Anyway, I hope people look into that because that attacks a lot of these issues that we've been talking about to improve performance. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I think you're absolutely right for folks in the room who are not part of the first meeting. We started off looking at percentage of students that are within walking distance of their school. But again, based on the discussions that we had in the room, we quickly realized that proximity or closeness to the school is actually a better metric and generates a lot of discussion and inputs as opposed to just walk or walkers, right? So, but to your question, I think the final report, that will be another one of the lenses that we'll be looking at within proximity. And again, if there are more than that, that's what we'd like to, again, get to the conversation. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to be heading this direction and then sweeping back in. And I know we're going along here, so you guys are all like marathon runners here. Okay.
There seems to be a lot of angst in the audience, and at the other presentation earlier in the week about these poor, hungry farm students. Could you please explain to the audience why farms is important in this analysis?
So we supplied some references in the booklet, but essentially farms is one measurement, but looking at socioeconomic diversity has been written about quite a bit in terms of the ability to improve test scores among low-income students. And there's also been a lot of research that shows the intermixing of high and low-income students. It improves global perspectives, reduces racial bias, and it doesn't have negative impacts on upper income, higher income students. And so really, it's seen as a focus on looking at this.
I was wondering if you could talk about how, if you were going to look at how boundary decisions were made in the past, because I went to White Oak Middle School. I'm wearing my gym shirt, which I didn't expect to still fit in, and that was 20 years ago. The way these boundaries were drawn, there were kids who live across New Hampshire Avenue, who in these very large, beautiful homes that would pass for anything in Potomac, who are not zoned for this school. The school is 78% farms. It was not when I attended it, and I wonder how much previous boundary decisions played a role in the changing demographics of this school. I live about it. I am half black, half Asian. My parents worked very hard, and I had a fantastic experience in this diverse school. But the boundaries are what people are talking about. Students are bused from neighborhoods outside of this neighborhood to come to the school already. So, why was that decision made, and what's stopping us from making that decision in the future?
Sorry, I'll try and take a stab at it. I think part of the analysis that we're trying to go through right now doesn't really get to that sort of historic evolution of boundaries. But what we have been learning is that there have been a lot of boundaries that have either never sort of changed historically or sort of have remained the same, and that has also caused a little bit of unrest. So when we look at, again, MCPS today, kind of snapshot in time, which is as of today, right now, these are the conditions, and we want to sort of, again, make people grapple with the issues around that. A study like that would be really useful just to understand the historical sort of trends of how that has evolved, but it hasn't been part of this. I don't know if that has been done in the past. Right?
So we haven't looked at the history, but we actually do have all the documentation from 1950 going forward that if anyone wants to come look at, you're welcome to schedule an appointment. All the capital improvement plans that have talked about boundaries since then are all available. So it'd actually be fascinating if anyone wants to come do that research with us. There's also just one book about Montgomery County from the 1800s to the 1950s that exists. So if anyone can get a copy of that book, we can put it up on the website. It's a great resource to understand the evolution of this county from its first school to where we are today.
And I'll just add one more thing to it. We are looking at sort of historically how some of the policies have evolved, and we will provide a snapshot of that. We did sort of get to that in this presentation. I'm trying to pull it up. But the idea would be to sort of just look at how the school system has changed, how the enrollment has changed, and what were some of the critical policies that were put in place. Now, whether those policies were sort of good or bad, that's sort of objective decision, but we want to make sure that we sort of paint an accurate picture of what was put in place.
And just for context, and I may get the number wrong, but I think there have been about 140 boundary changes over the last 131. Over the last 60 or so years. So, that is something that happens on a piecemeal basis often.
Thank you. I was most confused by the proximate
proximate school aspect of the analysis, it seemed that there was often some kind of correlation between the utilization and the farm's utilization as well, and that would often correlate with the proximate, attending a proximate school. And so what I began to wonder was, is there, or have there already been attempts to address what's going on in schools that are, that do have some low income and other problems? Have there already been attempts to address, for example, by busing, the problems that are there, and that those have not, really had an impact on the kind of socioeconomic indicators that you're looking at? In other words, does proximate mean, and I don't want to restrict this question, but does proximate mean that there's been busing, or that you're attending schools that are not immediately local to you, but that are within your consortium that you have an option to attend? What exactly does proximate mean, and what conclusion can you draw from that?
I think you raised some interesting questions about how to study that further, and so that's something that we can take on board. But one thing that I did note is that we removed from the students being studied children who are going to magnet or choice-based schools. So this was a data set that was focused on children attending their base school. So I think that may help to resolve some of the conflicts you're wondering about in terms of what the data was showing. But I think continuing to understand why such high numbers of kids aren't attending the most proximate school is a worthy question for us to continue to look at.
Well, just added, there's, again, data person. There's a great report called, it's from the Menace group about choice, and it talks about the history of how choice programs were placed in schools and the impact they had on our school system from the 80s moving forward. So again, go to the MCPS website, type in choice study, and you're going to find some really good data there.
Hi, you've made it very clear that you're not going to be making recommendations about the boundaries. But I would actually think that it would be a useful thing to have your recommendations. So I'm curious whether WXY would be qualified to make those recommendations, and if so, what your experience with that is.
Well, I'm not sure it's a relevant question, given that it's not part of our scope of work, but I appreciate it. We are working in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for example, right now, and set out a number of options on boundaries. It has been a good process, I think, in many ways, although I'd let the people in the school district answer that question. So, from a data analytics perspective, we've got a number of very talented people in our office, again, who had experience doing it in other places and have a kind of data analytics, writing algorithms background, using Python and other platforms to do it. But it isn't part of our scope of work. So in many ways, I appreciate the question, but it's not where we're headed.
Thank you. This is a very fruitful morning. Thank you all. My question is, does your company or will your company also collect data from the government about the population forecast in Montgomery County? If not 50 years, say, let's say 20 or 30 years. Because as we can see from the analysis, for Clarksburg High School cluster, 20 years ago is still a rural area, but now it's overcrowded. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, and I think we do want to make sure that the population projections are accurately presented as part of this analysis. And I think, again, what you'd appreciate is that when we get into phase 2, the tool that we are talking about will have things like this data point, and I think there was another data point mentioned earlier on. These will be sort of the overlay information. So as you're kind of looking at things like utilization, sort of diversity, you're also kind of looking at, okay, but what happens in the next 5 years? How does the population change? Does that really put things in perspective? So, yes.
Yeah, and just to clarify that a little bit, we will be looking to a degree at it, but our interactive tool and a lot of our work is based literally on student locations. Obviously, we don't have the details on those people, so from a privacy perspective, that's protected. But we're looking at current student population in our work, and then we will do another aspect of it, which is higher level, that will look at growth. But we can't get into the same kind of detail, obviously, on projections.
Hi, my name is Lee Kessler. I two girls at Beverly Farms in Hoover. And I think everything you guys have done, I work in RFPs and research and this stuff, so I value the way you're going about things. One question I do have, though, is when I was looking, and I only remember catching a couple of your guys' validations experience references, the work you've done in the past, and I noticed Brooklyn, I noticed New Rochelle, New York. Brooklyn Brooklyn is, I did a little statistics, 69.5 square miles. New Rochelle is 13 square miles. We are 500 plus square miles. They have much different populations per square mile. So I'm wondering if you guys have done work with group, sort of this kind of research in similar capacity school districts and with similar needs, or if you guys are referencing other similar size and examples in the work to say, hey, this has been done in this capacity, and look at the results that we can turn to. Is that part of what we're going to see at all?
That's a great question. I appreciate it. As part of our scope of work, we do actually have a benchmarking component to it. And we've started to explore that, although we haven't done it fully. And benchmarking is complex. There are counties that are comparable to Montgomery County in terms of size, in terms of population, in terms of education levels, in terms of demographics. Westchester County, where we've done a lot of work. However, in terms of how it organizes its schools, it's very different. There are other counties which the county essentially holds the power in terms of how the schools are run, but there might be a city included in that district as well. So our benchmarking will take a number of different tacks in a way. Some of it will look directly at the comparable size, population, demographics, levels of education. Some of it will look at sort of comparable administrative types in terms of places where the county has full responsibility for the schools. And so we are going to cross-cut against a number of themes looking at our benchmarking analysis. So it's a great question. We are, as we do school planning, but we're urban planners by nature. So for us to get into that data and information is really compelling. In some of those places we won't have all of the detailed information about the schools to make some of the direct comparisons, because right now we have a data-rich environment in Montgomery County schools, which we can't necessarily compare to other counties, but we're going to do our best.
Hi, my name is Janelle Lee. I'm coming from Wooten Cluster. If I remember correctly, under FAA, there's a fourth factor, which is the stableness of school assignment. So I'm wondering why that is not in your analysis. So I just want to say school is an integrated part of our community. No matter you have kids or not, school is important to our daily life. So our student is not just a data point, on your graph. So I think there are a lot of emotional factors and maybe mental health factors got involved in school reassignment. So I think this should not be taken lightly. And my question is why the stableness of school assignment is not one of your factors.
Thank you for that question. And I think we do our best, and I think we do understand the level of concern and anxiety here, and I think the degree to which our scope is focusing on engagement is reflective of this not just being a data exercise. We really care about and want to gather your thoughts and feedback. In terms of assignment stability, in many ways that's really an output of the three other concerns. And so we will need to take that on board to some degree. And assignment stability is really about minimizing the number of changes a student will have in their career. And so, that is something that we can find a way to study as an output. But of course, the only way to really study it is if you have options. And if you understand what I mean, because then you get a sense of it. But it's not it's not something that there is available data and can serve as a lens in quite the same way because it's an output of boundary changes themselves. Does that make sense?
I guess the only thing that I'd add to that, I think it was raised on table number 3 as well, that there are certain issues like, for example, can you separate siblings? That can have sort of a big impact on student outcome, and we agree. But those are the part of sort of what we call as sort of community intelligence, which will be part of the final report, that we're going to put it in front of the board. So they don't just consider students as data points, and we are completely with you on that. It's not about considering them as data points, but also hearing, again, narratives like this one, narratives like what we heard on table number 3.